Well, hello. Well, hello. Hey, Mike Manley. How are you, sir?
I am fine.
We have 1001 man.
10011.
That's MANL, the number 3Y.
Backwards three. Russian,
Back-
backwards Russian three set shape.
Welcome, everybody, back to Pencil, your favorite pandemic podcast. I am your first host of the evening, Jamar Nicholas, the Black DeCavett, your internet best friend, and Philadelphia's favorite son. Hello, welcome back to the show. I'm joined at the proverbial hip by my best bud in modern master of comic books, Mike Manley. Say hey, Mike.
Good evening.
Good evening. Hello, Penciliers. Welcome back to the show. Hey, Oscar. How are you? Hey, JRD. Oh, JRD. Mike. JRD wishes you a happy belated birthday.
Why, thank you. Yeah, I got a lot of social media birthday wishes between Facebook and then Instagram and Twitter and texts.
He was all full up with love.
Oh, full up with love. And in fact, it's funny because usually it lasts a couple days now because people will see like, oh, I forgot, like I do that, you go through your list of people that like, oh, I forgot so-and-so's birthday. But I think that's actually one of the nice things about social media. I mean, it's a silly thing maybe, but people feel good when you get someone says happy birthday.
Yeah, no, it is nice.
Even if you're like your makeup is running in the rain and you're sitting there crying by yourself eating your cake.
I mean, it does make it a lot easier if you choose to partake and, some well wishes because everybody wants to feel special on their birthday, right? How do you feel?
Some people like to not acknowledge your birthday because they're like, no. Right. I know I have friends of mine who don't want to acknowledge their birthday because they're afraid people will look at their age.
Oh, like that's a down thing?
For some people in some industries, yes. We've even touched a little bit on this in the podcast before. Mm-hmm. For some aspects of the business, there is a certain amount of ageism. So if you're not 20, you're fucked.
Right. Right. No, that's true. That's true. In a lot of industries, in a lot of cases. It's funny because I think of age in such a reverse because, I've once in a while somebody will ask me, Jamar, what's up with the gray hair? When are you going to dye that? And you know me, Mike, I've wanted to be old my whole life.
You are an old 7-year-old. You were like, you had that old man hat, like.
Hey, like I earned every one of these gray hairs, and I'm gonna proudly wear them. But
it's also a difference now. I think I was thinking, well, I could put a little gray into this.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, a little black into this.
Yeah.
But I don't know. So many people deal with that, especially with our generation. I think we realize that, and the generation right behind us, I think, deals with that more. I hear a lot about it in gaming and certain industries. It's like if you're over 30.
Right.
But if you look at the Asian culture, they revere people who will get older because you actually get better. You get wiser. You get stronger. Your drawing skill goes up. I mean, I'm better at 59. I'm better than I was at 58.
Yeah.
I honestly feel that way. I will a little bit, and I'm better than when I was 35.
Mm-hmm.
So,
right, you're scaling up, and I say too, like a lot of my assistants who are kind of complaining about their relationship problems, and I said, does anybody ever care about what a 22-year-old boy had to say? Right? Have you ever been on the edge of your seat going, huh? Wow, that's so interesting. Like even with age comes wisdom and respect in those regards. Like nobody cares.
Well, it's funny because if I think back to all the people that were my heroes growing up, all those people were well into their 40s or 50s or sometimes even 60s right? You know, Jack Kirby created the FF when he was 41, something like that.
Something like that.
So by the time he went to DC and created all that stuff at DC, he was in his 50s.
Yeah.
Right. And then he went back to Marvel and he was in his 60s.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so I think people can get really hung up on the age thing, but you should really look at it's like a skill building thing. It's like that's what it's about. It's not. It's just like, you know, like your yearly income tax. Oh shit, I didn't make as much as last year.
Right.
You know, it's like people get caught up in that the age game or the money game,
the numbers game. Yeah.
Yeah. And it can really make you feel really bad.
And you know, just like when I was a young man trying to pick up girls at the mall, man, baby, age ain't nothing but a number. You know what I mean? So on that note, let's give a shout out to our sponsors, our good friends at Graphicsly. See the joint up there? Clip Studio Paint, the artist tool of choice.
I was just using it about an hour before the podcast.
And also our good buddy John Morrow, who runs Tomorrow's Publishing, the publisher of Draw Magazine, the sister to Pencil, and some other of the finest historical comic,
like the Kirby Collector,
the Lego Brick Journal, and others.
Yeah, and in fact, I think John, again, I always tell people, go there because he always has some kind of special.
That's right. And tell him that you know us, and he might hook you up.
Yeah. He might toss in something for free. You never know.
That's right. tell him the Krusty Critic sent you. So let's bring in our guest here. So Mike Manley, for the first time in the history of Pencil to Pencil, not since the history of Draw Magazine, have we had a repeating guest. And
repeating back to back. We've had a repeat guest.
Back to back. Right. So our good buddy PHIL ALLORA is here again. He was here with us on Saturday, and we had such a great time talking, and we had so many comments flowing through the chat room. There just wasn't time to answer them all. And Phil's one of those guys we could talk to all night, so I'm sure we'll get some really engaging convo started. And if any of you pencilers are with us live last Saturday, if you'd like to come back in and ask those questions again, we'll try to get them on. So let's just get back into the conversation. Hey, Phil, come on in. How are you? What's up, bro? Hello.
Well, hello.
That's the pencil to pencil greeting. Well, hello.
Well,
I feel like I should be like a bobblehead, like a Charlie McCarthy or something.
Well, hello.
Well, hello. See, it feels good. It rolls off the tongue.
Yeah, it just rolls right off the tongue. Sorry, I'm gonna put my glasses back on here.
You got to put those Tony Starks on. I see you.
Oh yeah. As I settle down and get ready for. Have I sat down since Saturday? Thank you, J. Robert Deans. It's that JRD.
Yeah, that's J. You know the notorious JRD.
Actually, yes, I've sat down on occasion. Yes, but always at the calm right here at the Cintiq. You know.
No, do you stand and work?
I'll mix it up. Sometimes I'll work mostly sitting down, and then sometimes mostly when I'm taking meetings, I'll be standing up, and then I'll be working while I'm standing. So yeah, I'll do both. Like I got this ergotronic arm that I hooked up to a desk so I can mount the Cintiq to it. I don't know if you can see it in the camera.
Yeah.
I have one of those. They're great.
But it's great because I could stand and work. I mounted, I put my iMac on a series of tables that I stacked up on the table, and so that it's like eye level, so I could look at you guys while we're talking, and I get look at my reference and look back down at the drawing table. So it's just up down ergonomic. That was goes back to that.
You don't have
yeah. Because I discovered early on, when I was working in games, that I had a large monitor. And then I had another monitor, and they were side by side. And I got such massive neck strain from having to constantly use a mouse, use my other hand with the keyboard, and then like looking back and forth and like looking like this, like the whole time, like looking back and forth, it gave me like too much strain. So I just kind of took it upon myself to like stack this giant CRT on this tower of like Xerox paper. Earthquake be damned, but it was like, it basically it put my Cintiq below the CRT, and then I could just like look like this. And then that saved, like, I've never had any neck strain problems since that point.
That's interesting.
So, yeah, I've worked this way, like, I think since 2007, and I've never had a problem since.
It's funny how ergonomics and all that kind of stuff has turned into a business for anybody that works in an office. Like I remember when the giant ball was a thing, everybody sat on a giant like ball instead of a chair. And then there was like that one chair that looked like a like the chick chair. It looked like Plinko from Price is Right.
Yeah, you put your body in there, and then you sit there, and it puts it offsets the pelvic tilt, the anterior pelvic tilt. So like when you sit in the chairs for too long, like it upsets the balance of your pelvic tilt, puts your spine in an awkward position, puts a lot of strain in your lower back. Yeah. So, that's why, like, here's a tip for all those watching. Check out Craigslist for ergonomic chairs, especially if you want to get a deal on an Aeron chair. Check Craigslist. People want to get rid of an Aeron chair, and you don't want to spend $400 on it. You could probably get it for less if you look on Craigslist to see who's getting rid of an Aeron chair, and you might be able to work out a deal where you could go to their place that they're getting rid of it and try it out, see if it's the right size for you, because there are 3 sizes of Aeron chairs, which are probably the best chairs. That's the best chair that I've ever had when I was at Disney. And after that, I actually bought my own, and I bought it off Craigslist because every other chair in every other studio that I tried was horrible. And I would opt to bring my own Aeron chair into the studio and use it while I had to be there. So that way, like, if I had to be there for hours doing a board or, directing and whatnot, like I would have my chair, and that was like the way I would roll.
Yeah.
And I would just take it studio to studio.
So when you left, you put your boxes and everything, and you push it out on your chair, wheel it
Exactly.
out.
Exactly. And then, it's like taking care of your health while you're working in animation.
Yeah. They say the most expensive thing in your studio should be your chair.
Yeah. Aside from your equipment. Yeah. Aside from your programs, your office computer, and, whatever storage you're going to buy and stuff like that. Xerox machines and things. Oh, I did want to say one thing. It was on my mind since last week. I know we were joking around early when we started, but there was something that I said that was incorrect, and I just wanted to make sure I set the record straight on that.
Oh, it's errata. Go ahead.
Yeah. So just in case anyone was out there and confused, Vegas was the debut album of the Crystal Method, not the Chemical Brothers. So.
Look, your cat's blowing up now.
Yeah, I know, because it was such a flip. No, I'm kidding. I'm just messing around.
That's good. That's news you could use.
News that you could use to take your mind off everything else that's going on. Check it out. It's a great album. So
well, you know what? It's funny going back to talking about age and health and the kind of chair you're sitting in. I got a lot of really good feedback from your episode on Saturday, Phil, and also the one that keeps popping up was our talk with Brad Walker, Mike.
Okay.
Where people were really intrigued by this kind of other side of the table talk about mental health and just your your mental state or your emotional state as an artist working at such a high level. So maybe, Phil, we could start with such a upbeat topic, talking about like what is the general vibe of working on a contract show at such a high level of production? Is there burnout? Is crunch a big thing anymore in those industries? Like, how do people just deal with the high stress tool of trying to get this stuff done?
That's a good question. Everyone has a different way of dealing with it. There are many there are many things that I try and do. If I'm directing on a show, and especially a show like Glitch Text, like I'll make sure to check in with my artists like every other day, like maybe every 3 days, just to see how everyone was doing, see what they need, what they might be working on, if they had any questions, checking in with them, giving some suggestions. And if there's a way that I can, as a director, take the pressure off, be able to be there and reassure them to say, like, again, depends on the deadline, we can work something out. Like, sometimes like an artist will need a little bit more time, and that pressure of building on them. They're just like, oh man, I got like 2 more pages to go and I only got 1 day left. And if I sit down with someone and I talk to them about it and then one-on-one, and I just say, hey, like let's work this out. Like, okay, let's coordinate. Let's work around the schedule so that, I can work within my schedule to give them some breathing room, take that pressure off so that they can do their best work. My goal as a director is to make sure that the team has what it needs to succeed. And the more that I can go in to make that happen, by giving them, whether it be a little bit of breathing room, a little bit of coaching, a little bit of advice, a little bit of, input, depending on where they're at, then if that helps them get over those little hurdles that they have, like when they're under the gun, when they're in the deadline, that's like what is essential. And when you're in the trenches, that's something that people can really appreciate, because it's one of the things that, like, I kind of said to myself, like, this is what I would love to hear when I was a board artist. Like, if I'm in the trenches and I'm like, how am I doing? That's always a question, especially when you're on your own as a freelancer. You're out somewhere remote and the editor or the client just kind of wants the product. Like, they want the product, but there's that interaction that's a little different in animation, where you have an opportunity to play as a team and to be more of a coach, or to be more of a collaborator if you're on a board team per se, to give words of encouragement and build each other up, so that you all, like we were talking about last week, you all have an opportunity to build something that's going to stand the test of time, because where everyone's pushing to do the best work. And that was a stark difference that I saw when I was freelancing, in the tri-state area. The client just wants a job, and he wants it, they want the job, they want it in, they want it great. And you're kind of lucky if you get a little crumb from them. I'm not saying it's like they're all evil or like, mean spirited or anything, but they're just busy, So like, if they throw you a crumb, like, hey, I really liked the way you handled that illustration or that comic strip or whatever it is, it's like, oh, okay, fine. I didn't just get paid, but they actually liked the work that I turned over.
Right. Yeah. I think that's a really important point, because one of the skills that I have found very often missing, not only in comics, but in any artistic endeavor, is the person you're working with should be good with other humans, should be encouraging. Sometimes you have to be tough, but you also, this is not like working in an auto plant or, some repetitive job, like making a sandwich where at Subway, where like you cut 3 pieces of ham, 2 pieces of cheese, it's not like that. And every job, especially when you're boarding, is so completely different than the previous one that you worked on sometimes.
Yeah.
You're having to solve a very different problem. And I've worked with people that are very good like that. I can remember in the beginning when I started, Dan Reba was very good and very helpful. But I've also worked with other people that were like, they just make the sandwich. Just turn it in. And one of the things that I think helped me was I was older when I started. But if you're in your early 20s, you might not know how to communicate or how important it is to communicate with your director or editor or whatever. Let them know where you are. Not live in fear of the phone, not live in fear of the email. Don't blow their thing up on Friday when it was supposed to be in and like, yeah, well, I didn't get it in, because I'm sure you must have experienced that, where
it's the soft skills that not a lot of aspects of the, when someone goes to college for art, like they're mostly focused on the technical skills, the hard skills, you know, learning the means by which to get around in Maya, Photoshop, oil paint, whatnot. But it's the soft skills that come into play when you are working in any industry, you know, and how you, like, that's why it's great. I mean, not that it was like a career path that I was going to pursue, but like working in customer relations for retail, like it gives you an opportunity as a young art student or a student. Another tip for the week, I got a job in retail. Like that's what was helping to pay for my like funds while I was going to college. And what I was learning there was customer service, like how to work with a customer, how to help them meet their need and to rack up sales, you know, like, so I don't want to say like it's a manipulation, but it's basically if you are talking to your client, and if that happens to be a customer who walked in who was looking for a particular item in your store that you're in, and you're able to help that client meet their needs and then surpass their needs, they walk away from that experience, depending on your you know, how polite you are, you know, how cordial you are, how much you go out of your way to help them and take them as a human being, and you kind of like usher them through the store to really take care of them as a person. When they walk out of that store, like they're going to realize, wow, you know, like I had such a great experience. I want to go back to that store. And that kind of like resonated with me after I started work professionally. It was like the clients that I really enjoyed working with are those kind of clients that I had that interaction with. Like when we had that mutual respect, we had that exchange of ideas where we were talking back and forth to reach the best result. When I was working with clients who were just like, yeah, okay, just do the job, you know, and I do it and they're like, yeah, okay, go. I was like, all right, well, that was a job. That was an experience. I'm probably not going to repeat this experience.
Right. Unless
they call me and they're like, hey, we need this thing. But those soft skills really come into play. And I saw that firsthand when I was working for, I think it was like in my junior year. It was one of the other things I did in my junior year of college. I got a kind of like an internship. It wasn't quite an internship, but it was a studio assistant job that I took for an illustrator who was working out of New York, who was moving to New Jersey. His name was Steven Guarnaccia, who happened to be a teacher at SVA. And I was in his class and we were talking, you know, and he, you know, we were talking about ideas and stuff like that. And out of the blue, he just called me up and said, hey, I have a studio position open for a studio assistant. Do you want to come in and check it out? So we talked over the phone for about an hour or two. And then I finally, after, you know, we talked about all the parameters of the job, you know, I agreed to it. And I spent the summer working with 2 assistants in the studio. And there I got to see like how those soft skills play out. I would listen to him on the phone talking with clients. And it was just like, oh, he's putting everything that I've been hearing like in the retail business, he's putting that into practice when he's talking to clients on the phone, talking to museums, talking to foreign collectors and foreign ad agencies and stuff like that. So he was working internationally as well as locally. And then he would utilize those skills as well to the studio assistants. So we would be under deadlines and pressure to get stuff done. So we were helping to finish work and pack it up, ship it. And then I would also have to call up clients and ask, like, you know, for their address and all this stuff. So I had to put those skills into play. And that helps to parlay into where you go when you get into, say, like a studio like Pixar, for example. When you get there, you know, you have that opportunity. Like you're still your own company and you still need to put on, I don't want to say an act, but you need to basically put your best foot forward and be your own best representative. And that means being polite, cordial, negotiating for things that you need, and being very direct and open with like, hey, I need this, or hey, can I get that? And doing it in such a way that you demonstrate your ability to communicate at a higher level. And that kind of like helps, especially when you get up to the higher ranks, because when you start directing, you need to start communicating with executives above you as well as your team below you. So you have to make sure that you're communicating clearly and directly so that people are getting what they need and you're helping to move the process along, and everyone's having a great experience along the way.
Yeah.
I'm-
Go ahead.
I'm seeing a lot of kind of like we're talking about generations a second ago about generational shifts and even management or leadership, where I think a lot of people, maybe from Mike's generation, and Mike has lots of great stories about some of the brilliant editors you've had along your way in the comics. But a lot of people always think about the J. Jonah Jameson type of boss, this like hyper, like
Parker!
like banging on a desk and throwing things at the wall and leading through fear,
Right.
versus leading by I don't know what the opposite of fear is. And I think
compassion and empathy.
Yeah, and I think just even getting through to the younger generations, like I even hate saying millennials. Millennials are in their 30s now. Takes a different tack, right? Yeah. To reach younger employees, because their system of working isn't the same that you may have come in with. Like a lot of people want, rather than just money. Yes, we all want money, but you also want to know that you're affecting the company, or you're making good, a good wave.
Yeah, you're not just like a worker bee.
Yeah. Right. The cog in the wheel thing doesn't work anymore.
Yeah. Right.
It's taken on a personal tack. So
I think the other thing I will say that ties into this is that we all have that experience where you're at a meeting and somebody says something and you don't quite catch it. You should never be afraid to ask that question again, because otherwise it becomes like one of those I Love Lucy kind of things where you like try to find, because a lot of people are afraid to ask questions, and they're like, well, I didn't hear that, but I don't want to ask that person because then they'll think I'm stupid. So then they try to go through all this anxiety and rigmarole to
the spiral.
Right, yeah. Because I especially when you're on a team, and I know this just from being a teacher, you always ask the students at the end of the class, did everybody get what we were talking about? But that there's people in that class that they did not know what you were talking about, right?
Right.
But they don't want to ask. They don't want to say that they didn't get what but I'm sure there's 2 or 3 or 4 people that are like, what did he say?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's why.
Have you ever experienced something like that? Have you ever experienced?
Yeah, of course. But that's why, if you're in a leadership position, it's always good to do a personal one-on-one follow-up with each team member, just to see how they're doing, check in with them, and if they miss something, you can correct them in a way, or bring them back to that information, or remind them of that information that was covered, so in a way that is hopefully not demeaning or derogatory, or shows that you're flustered by their lack of concentration on that one particular point. I mean, if they missed it, they missed it. There could be a lot of things going on, but you can gently guide them through the process of like, okay, yeah, we talked about X, Y, and Z. Do you remember how we're going to do this, this, and this? Like, oh yeah, right. And including them in on that trip down memory lane is much less stress on you as a person than if your ego or your anger flares up and you're like, well, how can, like when you get really upset, that could come across in a negative way. And I've learned that firsthand. It doesn't generate an experience that you want to replicate, and it doesn't generate an experience that the people that you're working with and that they're reporting to you that they want to experience either. And that kind of erodes the trust. And then you have a situation where you have to start rebuilding that back up again, to come back to that level of we came in with mutual trust, and then there was something happened, and now we're offset. So now we have to go back to let's work on our interpersonal relationship again and communication, so we can get back up to that point now where, we trust one another. I mean, it's the same with kids, when you have kids, there's the authoritarian, parent-child relationship. And as your child gets older, eventually they're going to just start defying you, because they just, they don't want to listen to the authoritarian anymore. But if you communicate with them, hopefully in diplomatic fashion that you get them to come around to your understanding and you work something out in a very well thought out, well communicated manner, then they could start to do things because they want to, not because they have to. And that's
what I thought that's when you told them to go pick a switch.
That's how I grew up.
Right. I mean, there's a lot of different things going on. There's a lot of things in play. Like, yeah, you could play the authoritarian card, and you could do that, and you could do that in a workplace too. And I've seen that, and people, like, there's a ripple effect for that. When people come down and make an example of someone in front of a crowd, that puts a ripple effect that goes out through the entire, team, and they're just like, oh snap, like, oh, I don't want to, like, now the rules are, it goes from like it's a cooperation to more like it's a dictatorship, and now it's fear is like in the crew. So like, if I don't fall in line, I'm going to get in trouble and I'm going to get called out. So people start to operate differently. It becomes less engaging. People start to pull back and disengage from the process, and you want to make that not the case. So if you have a team meeting, it'd be great to go over everything, go over all the information, and then open it up for questions. If people don't have questions, that's fine. But it also comes from the top. Like, you work on shows that there's not a lot of communication and information or suggestions are not welcome. That ripples through the team, and people are just going to do whatever it is they're asked to do, but nothing more. But if you have a case like GlitchTex where people were told up front by Eric and Dan, they said, look, we want you to be a huge contributor to this, whatever ideas that you have to make this show better, we'd love to hear it. And then they just open the floor for the board artists and all the creatives to step forward. Even the PAs and production team were able to throw ideas into the mix. And if it made it in, it just made the show that much better. So
Phil, would it be safe to say if I worked on a production with you, there'd be a room with boxing gloves in it? Is that how? So we're going to adjourn to the meeting room and work out some problems.
Now you're gonna pitch your board.
Only on some productions, like, there was stuff like that. But
did you find there was a difference between animation and games at all in that regard?
Even the crunch. I think crunch is different in video games.
Yeah. Crunches are different in games than they are in animation. Like, animation, like, depending on whether you're working on a series or feature, crunches can be like short sprints. There might be like a crunch to get things into editorial, like for first screening, and everyone's crunching to hit the deadline. Sometimes with games, like, there'd be a crunch for beta, and that could be like quite a bit longer. And then there's a crunch for alpha, and that gets longer. Like, it could be longer. So it all depends on how much needs to be done and how much the change of the game needs to go into the pipeline. So, and again, every game studio is different. There's some game studios, like, I know people who are at Blizzard who I met when I was in games and who went from animation into Blizzard, and they love it there. They think, like, Blizzard's like the best, chillest studio to work for. They have a balance. Like, a lot of companies talk about, like, work-life balance, but from the impression that I get from people who have been at Blizzard, they feel like the balance is upheld in terms of, like, work life. I'm not saying it's going to be cush. I'm sure it's hard. I'm sure they have a lot of, like, deadlines and high standards they have to meet. Every company is different. So, like, you're going to have fluctuations as to, and you've read it online, there's going to be fluctuations as to, like, how companies treat their employees. And there are some good ones and maybe not so good. But,
yeah, I would think that most artists' responses would be, if J. Jonah Jameson chewed you out in front of other people, they would be gay. That person's a dick. And that kind of, everybody kind of just throttles. They just start automatically throttling back because you go, why do I want to put myself in that?
Right. What do I get out of that?
Right.
You know,
and you have to ask them the question. It's like, do you want to work for people like that? Would they go to bat for you? Like, if you're getting, like, for example, if your work or your person or whatever you've presented is being mocked and denigrated in front of a group of people, it says a lot about the people that are doing that. And then that it puts a question in everyone's mind who's on the team. Why am I here aside from the paycheck? You know, why am I putting myself out there for this person? If that's the response that I'm going to get eventually when it's my turn, you know, I'm going to just do whatever it is that they want, but I don't think I want to repeat this experience. And then that ripples in itself, because then when that person goes on to their next show, they've established a reputation for themselves, you know, that they treat people that way. And then when they go on to that next show, everyone who goes onto that show may have heard from their friends who've worked on the other show that they were on, be like, oh,
you know, everybody is spilling tea all the time. Everybody is, everybody has those stories.
That's why it's best to try to create an experience on your team that you, or even within your group, that you just enjoy your time spent with those people. Again, I'm not saying that it's like was it where everyone just kicks back and doesn't do their work, but you know, we all put our nose to the grindstone and we get it done, and we all treat each other with mutual respect.
Nothing but quesadillas and comfort dogs.
It's like, as long as everyone's operating on that level of mutual respect, then the great things can happen. If there's a pecking order and a hierarchy, and there's an environment that's created where we're going to make people feel or I should say the management of how the show's run or the project is run is that we're going to make examples of people, then it can only last for so long. You know what I mean? You can rule by fear, but eventually that's going to catch up to you in one way or another. And that's not the best way to have a long run of prosperous shows. You can have a long run. Yes. I'm not saying you can't, but you know, eventually, I heard it even in comics, there are artists who were very
difficult to work with.
Yeah, difficult to work with. And then after a while, that reputation catches up to them, and then they're scrambling for work and be like, why won't anyone hire me? It's well, you know.
And that kind of self-assessment is really hard for people to see in themselves. It's always somebody else's problem, or somebody slammed the door in their face, but it's you. Well, not you, Phil, but you know what I'm saying.
I know. Well, that's the other thing that we have to be aware of as artists is be able to look at yourself and say, you know, if we're always looking for ways to improve our craft, that's great. But what about your person? When you make a mistake, do you fess up to it? Do you take responsibility? Do you apologize? I've had to do that on occasion. I've gotten called on something and I was like, you know what? I'm sorry. You're right. That was totally, you know, and it's you have to be able to look at yourself and say, what else can I improve? I'm working on my art. How are my relationships? How is my relationship with myself? How are my relationship with, my family or my clients or my friends? What's lacking? You know, because it's always as an artist, it's easy to look at your own stuff and be like, I could really improve on my rendering or my, the way I do form or whatever, capture a form on 2D paper. But nobody ever takes a step back and be like, how am I coming across to people?
Right. I love it. You're a jerk face. Do you know that? Well, but look at the way I draw hands.
Look at this art. It's amazing, right? Yeah, but you make people want to run, so.
Well, usually what happens with an artist is that you advance in your career mostly based upon, at least in comics, was you got a job, people liked it, your work was hot, right?
Yep.
You were, and then people compete, and then you get the chance to say, well, I'll work on this, I'll work on that. And I always remember this story in regards to someone like Alex Toth, who everybody loved, said he was a genius. But I believe it was Joe Kubert, who they were childhood friends. I'm trying to remember the story where he gave Toth a job and said, "Don't change the job."
Mm.
And because Toth was known to be a kind of a difficult person, later in his life, he was actually diagnosed, I believe, as being bipolar. And he took the job, and he changed the job. And if I remember correctly, Kubert never worked with him again. Right. So there are some people that are like that, and I think comics is different than animation because I work alone. If Mimi's not here, or Liang's not over, or like today I was Zooming with my buddies. You work by yourself. Right. In animation, you're usually in a studio. You're usually having to navigate the particulars of that studio environment. But as a cartoonist, most cartoonists work by themselves.
Sure.
Right. And so you've got all that stewing in your head. You're not getting like a fresh perspective.
Yeah. Or even a cartoonist working in animation, we still got all that stuff stewing in our head. It's just that we see people on well, not now, but but
welcome to my world.
Yeah, now that we're in the new normal. Thanks, COVID. But when we see each other on a more day-to-day basis, we still have all that stuff swirling around in our head. And then on the top of that, we got other things that we got to juggle. But yeah, you have an opportunity, even as an artist working at home, to interact with your clients and your UPS guy in a way, or your FedEx guy. In a way that like creates an experience that people want to like return to, Yeah. Oh, by the way, speaking of people returning to this experience, if people have come back, I want to steer it back to the questions that we didn't get to answer last week, because that's what motivated us to do this again. Is like, apparently, as you said, Jamar, there was a slew of questions that were from last week, but we didn't have time to get to, so maybe we should jump into those lightning questions.
I kind of don't have one. They kind of disappeared from the last one. I was hoping that we'd get a lot of those guys, because everybody that was watching were kind of like repeat offenders. So I'm trying to get them to answer questions again. But
I know I would like. Maybe we can start it. What were some of the drawing skills that you took from, say, because you went from wanting to be in comics, as we talked about, then going into animation, and then branching out into different areas of animation, and then games. So what would you say were your core areas that you were always working on trying to improve on, that allowed you to transition between, because it's different. It's, comics is not the same as making a game.
Right.
And drawing a character for a game is not necessarily it's not as personal, because you're having to work with 5, 6, 7, who knows how many other people.
Right. Good question. Drawing skills are always going to be applied across the board. So like the better you can draw and visualize an object in your mind to be able to put it down on paper or Cintiq, whether it's a game character or an animated character or a comic character, the more you can crystallize that vision in your head and put it through your hand, through your drawing tool to get it out to express it. That's across the board. That's going to be a universal skill that is applicable to all three genres. Filmmaking is something that I needed to work on, and I was constantly working on when I was working in. I would watch films with the sound off, even when I was working in comics. Like when I wanted to get into comics, I would spend time watching. Yeah, I would just turn the sound off and I would just like watch the film, and I would like pause the film and either do a sketch of that composition, because you're staging what they call in animation. You're staging your composition in comics, or your shot in filmmaking. Like those are the things that you want to improve on. You want to improve putting those shots and into your memory bank, so that when you're sitting down to do a board, you have a library to draw from. You're like, oh yeah, there's the shot. I mean, I'll just throw out one, that everyone knows. It's hopefully there's a shot that Spielberg did, which is the rack focus zoom in.
Yeah.
Or sorry, it's not rack focus. It's a zoom in, truck out, dolly, move that he borrowed from
Hitchcock.
Vertigo.
Yeah.
I watched Hitchcock's Vertigo specifically to like look at the filmmaking, and I wanted to like backwards engineer, like, okay, where did Spielberg study? I was trying to ask myself questions like, okay, if Spielberg grew up looking at films and making his own films and putting in 10,000 hours making films in his backyard with his little 8mm camera, like what films was he looking at? So when he created the shot for Jaws, when Chief Brody is on the beach and the kid gets attacked on the raft and we see his reaction, he borrowed that shot from Vertigo. And that was a specific use of a specific shot for a specific effect. And it worked, and everyone was like, oh, snap. Like it heightened the drama and the realization for Chief Brody at that very moment. So when I was looking at Vertigo, I was like, well, okay, so where is like Hitchcock, where's he drawing his inspiration from? And then I started going back through Hitchcock's films and like trying to figure out like, what did he do differently? Why were his shots, or how did he compose a sequence? Why was it so terrifying? Or why did it work? And I remember reading like, there's one quote, I'm going to murder it right now because I can't think of it off the top of my head. Hitchcock was saying like, once the actors are placed and the filming is done and the dialogue is added, then the film is like ready to be seen or something like that. Someone could find it on the internet. I totally mangled it. But anyway, what I took away from that was the fact that he added the dialogue last. When he started out, he was working in silent, like, film-ish type of standards where they would film everything first and then they would record the audio and then place it into the film. And
right
about that, you want to be able to tell the story visually no matter what. And the dialogue is kind of secondary. It's there to support the visual narrative. So like how, as a filmmaker, when you sit down to plan your shots and your sequences, like how do you put your shots together without the audio and just sell the story visually? And you have to do the same thing with comics. Like you're laying out a page. How do I sell the layout? So I move the audience through the page, and then how do I sell the story so that I can heighten the drama for where I want it to go? And I would typically, here's another tip that I would do. I would talk to young board artists about this, and I would say, like, when you take your script page, you look at your script page and you just go down the side of the page and like you pick your shots. Don't draw anything. Just pick your shots and find out what is the most important thing that you want to deliver in that page. And they're like, well, I got all this stuff and I got to do this action thing. And I'm like, yeah, okay, that's fine. But what's the most important thing that you want to say about this page? What's the most important piece of information you want to get across? They're like, oh, it's probably this part here where they deliver this line. Like, okay. So pick your shot for that. Now work backwards. And like, so everything builds to that shot.
Right. It's all supporting that. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like reading up, it's one of the early things that I did when I was starting in storyboard is like, I would read about film editing, because it's like the boarding is one thing, but then when you get into the film directing, it's another thing. But the best film directors from the earlier golden age of cinema were film editors, because they were shooting on a limited budget of film. They knew what they had to cut because they had been cutting for so long. So that when they got behind the camera, they would shoot exactly what they already saw in their head based on what they knew they were going to cut later in the edit. So, man, I know everyone talks about Walter Turp's book.
The shot by shot.
Well, that's Cats. Shot by Shot, I did read that was a book recommended by Klaus Janson that I did read when I was in college. And that was really helpful for learning the mechanics of how you want to stage your film. And that's what I would look at when I would look at a comic page. I would look at, how do I want to stage this film? Like, I want to be aware of my line of action. I want to be aware of my cameras and move my cameras around the scene. What do I want to focus on? And that all parlayed right into games and animation. But there's a book, I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head. It's one editor who put out a series of books. He became a film director, and he put out this little series of books that were really short, really thin, fast reads. But there was so much information that I picked up out of those books about how he approaches how to make a film that I've utilized those since I got started. And I should know this, but I borrowed the book from the library and I wrote down all the information, and then I forgot what the damn book was called. So,
well, I always think it's really important. I try to stress this to the people coming up, is that you're joining a conversation, a visual conversation that all these directors and editors, all the people working in film or comic have been having. Right.
Mm-hmm.
They've been having, and films have been having it with comics, and comics have been having it with films, and now we're all having it with games, and everybody's sort of talking to each other and borrowing from each other.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're going to come into the business, it's important for you to be able to speak that language. You don't even have to love Hitchcock. You don't have to love Kubrick, but if you can't speak to what they were doing, then you can't have a conversation with the other people. Right. They're going to talk about stuff, and you're going to be like, what does that mean? And I found that there was a generational thing that started happening about 10 years ago, where if it was in black and white, people didn't want to look at it. It's like, no.
That's
I can't look at it. Yeah, I can't look at a black and white film. And I would always try to get them. There's a great website called 1,000 Frames of Hitchcock, and it goes through his entire library of films, and there's 1,000 stills from each movie, and you can basically see how he boarded his films, because he storyboarded his own films,
right?
And that was very educational when I first started doing storyboards, because I read that the shot by shot. I think I had the natural instinct. I had to learn the 180 and the basic mechanics, but and then you start looking at film. And then you can't look at it passively. You become a director. You develop that director's eye. And when you're looking at a film, you go, "Oh yeah!" You can get involved on it in a different level.
Yeah, like I one of the things I loved doing when I was at Feature was, like, I would delve into their library, and I'd watch films that were black and white. Like there were some Anthony Mann films that I was just blown away by the depth by which they were able to get in these films. They're black and white, really low budget, but I'm a huge film noir fan, so I was just like taking these films out and just watching them, and I would just watch them for the cinematography and the staging and the way that they would light the films. And they achieved things on film that I hadn't seen done in other films, and I was like, okay. And I would look at these films, and then I would look at, like, well, how did this filmmaking inform Roman Polanski when he made Chinatown? And then how did his film inform the director who worked on LA Confidential? Okay. And then I would do that with comics too. I'd kind of try to trace the line back. So like if I was looking at an artist who I felt like there was an inclination, like a lean towards, say, Frazetta, I would look at their work, and then I would try and trace that inspiration, that line of inspiration, to where his source was. And it was like, okay, or her source was. Like, oh, okay, she's probably looking at this artist. Okay, and then who was that artist looking at? And then I go back a little further. Who was that artist looking at? And then as you go further back, you start to discover all these different filmmakers and artists you hadn't known about before. So it's the same thing with Spielberg. Like you look at Spielberg and then you trace it back, like, oh,
right.
Hitchcock. Oh, and who's Hitchcock looking at? And then you go back a little bit further and down the line. And then you start getting into some really interesting areas that you know, like someone recommended to me a long time ago, like check out Buster Keaton's work. And I was like, ah. But then I started going back and looking at it, and I was like, wow, this is ahead of his time in terms of what he was able to do is in a silent movie era. And then it still holds up. I mean, not technically wise, but the ideas hold up. So then you can look at it like, okay, so how could you do that today, you know, with all of our technology and still get the same comical effect? If we were to borrow a little bit of that magic and a little of that magic, and then, as I say, everything's a remix. So, you know, you kind of like, you look at all these different sources, various sources, and then you come back to what you're working on, and you're enriching your palette by being diverse, by being influenced by different things, and then putting it through your own sensibilities and coming up with something new. And if you do it often enough, you know, you might end up becoming, or not becoming, but I mean, you become a better artist, yes, because you're standing on the giants that have come before, but you're also forging a new path. I mean, Quentin Tarantino, say what you will about him. Some people like him, some people don't. But when I look at his films, they are very thought-provoking to me. Like, some are really hard to watch, you know, just based on the subject matter and the way he depicts violence on screen. But he does do things that push the envelope, and you know, whether it be filmmaking or just the way he tells the story. And I'm like, not a lot of people are doing that. And he's kind of standing out there on their own. And I'm not saying, like, you know, being ultra violent is like all rah, that's the way to go. But he's just showcasing, like, this is an aesthetic that, you know, like he's looking for a reality. He's presenting a version of his reality that maybe a lot of people won't go down, you know, and that works for him. That's where he's going. He's telling stories in that genre. So he's forging a path in that direction. But if, say, some student came along and said, hey, I want to do a film about a particular subject matter that deals with a particular demographic or ethnic background, and they want to really dive deep into that and explore it and put that storytelling out there, I mean, they would probably find an audience for that would really appreciate it. You know, like Hair Love was an animated film that came out not too long ago, and it made a huge impact because there is a hungry audience that is looking for content that's diverse and speaks to them. You know, like when I was growing up, I would look around at a lot of different things because what was being presented to me didn't quite meet the reality of like what I was experiencing. So I was like, well, this isn't real to me, you know, like in the sense that no more than like Goodfellas is real to me from my background, you know, like I know that there is that, yes, and I love Scorsese's work. It's not my reality, and I don't identify with it, but it's like, oh, it's interesting. Like, we can go down that path and see what that world is like, which is different from my Italian world. Makes sense.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. You don't have any Pauly Walnuts in your world.
Well, maybe I was sheltered from that. I don't
know. Okay.
Hey, Phil, I have a question from the room.
Yeah.
Our buddy Oscar is back. Hey, Oscar, good evening. Oscar asks, I know that Phil has worked as a character designer, as an animator, and storyboard artist as well. Which one do you enjoy the most?
That's a tough question. Well, they're all rewarding in their own regard or own respects. The one thing I liked about what I loved about the character design aspect of working in animation is that when you could be blue sky, you can go any direction. You can just have a lot of creative freedom. Like, yes, you still have to hit the client's directive and their description of the character, and you have to find the character, you know, as you're blue skying. So there's a lot of creative freedom there. But then when you work in story, you have the opportunity to really sell a story. So you get to see that character come alive. And it's the same with animation. You have an opportunity to have that character come alive for that scene and deliver the emotional content that you're trying to get across to the audience and communicate. When you do it over storyboards, you're communicating for a bigger impact, to deliver something that, to deliver a message and communicate various emotional beats, to tell more of that content, to say more in a way, because you're just, you're giving more information to the audience. So what I find is, like, under all of it, you're still going for that emotional intent. Like, whether you're designing a frog or boarding that frog or animating that frog in a small scene, or boarding that frog over the course of a sequence, you're still trying to deliver that emotional intent to the audience. Like, what are you trying to say emotionally? Like, how are you trying to connect with them emotionally? And it's kind of a toss-up, and it's nice to be able to switch back and forth between the disciplines, so you have a chance to keep things fresh and alive, and then how one informs the other. Like, if you have, for example, if you're good at animating and making strong poses, that's going to help inform your character design, because you're going to look for those strong emotional poses, so that you're delivering not just hey, look, it's a nice design of a character standing there, like, hanging out. I'm a character design. No, but you're delivering something that has a good design. It's an appealing design, but it also maybe hits a story moment or an emotional beat for that specific character that's important and relevant to their whole arc, like what they're trying to get across.
Now, would you say you learned that more at, say, from Disney? Because that seems like a real Disney. That's like in The Illusion of Life. They talk about sort of form follows function, kind of.
Yeah, I mean, that was really heavily espoused at Disney. I mean, every one of their movies, when you look at it, they are telling story from the storyboard all the way through to the final product. So every aspect of a film's production should be telling an emotional story. From the color, from the storybook, the storyboard, the workbook phase, the color scripts, the character design, the character animation, cleanup animation, all the way through to final color and final edit and composite. I mean, all of that has to, like, tell the story of each of those sequences and work in unison to deliver the emotional story content that they're trying to deliver at the end of the film.
If you're working in a game, the story is different because it involves gameplay.
Right.
So do you feel that they can emphasize different aspects of the character design because of that? Because it's not a direct, straight narrative like you're watching. You know what I mean?
Right. You're delivering, like, in the cinematics that when I was working in games, I worked on Ratchet and Clank Future, which was a more comical story. The Resistance franchise was more of a serious story. It was more live action oriented. Mm-hmm. So yeah, we had to, like, the way I approached it was the same thing. I was still approaching it the same way. Like, what is the character story in each one of these beats? Like, even though it's a small snippet, like, how can we express what the characters are feeling in this particular moment? How can I frame or stage this so that we're getting the most emotional impact for the performances for the animators? And how do we tell the story visually? So again, going back to comics, like, if I have to stage a live action scene and I want things to feel really still and calm, like, how am I going to shoot that? How am I going to visually express that, Hale at the end of Resistance is alone, like, and he's emotionally barren, like, I'm going to be wide, as wide as I can get. He's walking alone in a snowstorm, and when I finally do go close to him in that end of the game, like, I finally get on him and he's contemplating ending everything. And I'm like, okay, so how do we frame that? So as a filmmaking, it was like wide, a little bit closer, a little bit closer, a little bit closer, and I kept getting closer until I finally got to him, and then I revealed like where he was emotionally, and then I mean that was the thought process that I had, which was slightly different than say like when I was approaching a scene in Ratchet, where we were staging things for comedy. Like, so whenever Captain Quark was on screen, I was trying to stage for his broad character acting to make sure that we got enough of his silly antics and silly stuff. So the camera work and the staging reflected that kind of mood, And of course,
so would you say you would pull back more?
Yeah, I'd have to be a little bit. Yeah, so we'd be wide, it's kind of established, and then we'd come in a little bit closer. It was a little bit more sitcom-ish at times.
Right.
But where I could go wide to show the grandeur of like these really amazing sets the environment team and the composite team and the game design team made, then I would just be like, let's soak this up. Let's like really soak it up. For the opening sequence on Tools of Destruction, I was basically trying to create like this frenetic movement of like they're on this kind of like a hover cycle, and it just like kind of goes on a crazy ride through the city. So the cutting and the pacing and the panning was all to heighten that sense of craziness, and then it kind of all came to a hard stop, and then everything got back to normal again. So the cameras also reflected the emotion that I was going for. So a lot of the cutting later, after that big opening MPEG or movie, was a little bit more locked down or a little bit more conservative. We still did like, to conserve on shot count, we still did move the camera around quite a bit. I was watching it recently and I was like, oh, okay. Similar to how Spielberg would do a oneer, where he'd be like, in one composition, he'd be on two characters having a conversation and one character would cross, and then the camera follows, and then we move to another composition where now that character's a little further away, talking to a third character. They have a little bit of a conversation. The first character moves in. Now we've got a 3-shot that we went from a 2-shot to a 2-shot to a 3-shot, and then moving the camera again. And it's like thinking about your set like a live action, set. You're thinking about like the camera in a different way than you would board on a 2D production. Like oftentimes in a 2D production, you're just like, because it's 2D and it's a lot harder to do that. I mean, it's difficult to do in 3D, but on 2D, you'd be like on a 2, and it might be faster just to cut to a single and have a character walk in than to track the character moving over,
Right. And it's also more animation to have the person walking.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And in 3D, if you're using mocap, like we were using mocap and Resistance, you could cycle a clip. So like if you have a walking clip, you can recycle that clip. And if you need to have like a big wide shot with the characters continually walking, you don't have to hand key all that because you've got the mocap. So you can save a little mileage there in terms of animator time, but you still have to composite all those shots. So you're trading animation time versus composite time.
Just like He-Man, when He-Man would run just like Tarzan in those old movies.
Yeah. The good old Filmation recycled shots. I love that. When I was a kid, I would always watch those and I'd be like, okay, how many times are they going to show that 3/4 down shot of He-Man running in, stopping, pivot left, pivot right, and then run to the other direction.
Right.
And then I saw it again in Tarzan and Lone Ranger, and I was like, oh my God, it's the same shot, the same animation. Doesn't anybody notice this, or is it just me?
Yeah. I guess if you're that high in Fruit Loops, you don't notice anything.
Phil, I have some more questions.
Yeah, let's get to them.
So Debbie, who was here on Saturday, Debbie got bumped for time. Debbie returns thanks and asks, Phil, what is the most difficult or challenging type of scene to animate? So that could just be maybe a broad thing, like does everybody groan when this comes up, or maybe you personally?
Quadruped animals or quadruped creatures are challenging because you have multiple legs and
the horse
body mechanics that you have to deal with. Short scenes like short scenes that are short in footage that are very quick. You have to basically hit your footage, but also deliver all of the key drawings that need to convey the action that's being described in a very short amount of time. So
can you give an example of that, Phil? Like I get it, but maybe for some people who don't know
like for example, if you have like, I don't know, like 2 feet, like there's a shot that's like 2 feet long in terms of animation footage, and you have to have a character run in, grab something, and run out.
Mm-hmm.
And to make that clear at a very fast pace, it's going to be, clarity is always important. Clarity and believability that's like the things you're shooting for. So you want to have a character run in and make it clear that they're grabbing that thing.
Right. So how long do you hold on that shot and grabbing?
Or how do you stage it in such a way that when they come in and they grab it, that it's clear enough to the audience that they know, because again, the eye is going to recognize like there's movement on screen in the first 8 to 10 frames of a shot. And if you got a character coming in and they're running in to grab something quickly, like how do you make that clear so that they grab it in such a way that it's clear enough to show the audience what they grabbed, and then they get off screen so that when they watch it again in real time, you know, in the context of the entire film, between those, if that shot is only 2 feet and it's sandwiched between these other shots, that they'll know in that very short clip that they've run in, they've grabbed the potion that's important to like throw into the, I don't know, the cauldron, and the next shot, and they know it was the green potion versus like, I mean, yes, it'll be green, but even if it's not colored in the animation itself, that they ran in, they grabbed the green potion next to the red and the purple potion, and they moved past camera. So you knew like, I got it. Like my hero grabbed the green potion and it was clear enough because it was a quick action based on the context of the entire flow. So overall, it's like, you have to be clear, and you have to be, what did I say? Clear and, now I'm losing my train of thoughts.
Well, the thing is about that, it has to be staged.
Yeah.
So that you see the hand grabbing it, you see the object, you see the person grabbing it, and then when they're gone, you see that it's gone.
Yeah.
Right. And so, like, how long does it take for the eye? I remember reading very in the beginning, reading, I think it was of Mice and Magic, where Tex Avery figured out how many frames it took for people to recognize something like an anvil. Like one frame, people, their eye could, you could sense the motion.
See this, you're right.
Yeah. So it's like, how long does a hand have to be on it before? And I guess depending upon the production, you get to do a pencil test, right? Now you would time that out in Storyboard Pro, I suppose.
Right. Yeah. And for readability, like at Storyboard Pro, like I found that as I'm timing boards, like sometimes I'll time a character running into a scene to grab something. I'll give, like, say the grab pose, like, again, this is boards, not animation. Let's say they're running in on 4 frame. That's really fast. Let's say I'd slow it down to like 6 frames. And then the grab pose might be like, 6. And then probably I'd add another 8 frames to like hold it. So it's like 14 frames, just long enough for them to
come in
see
and
the grab
it.
And they may not be able to, like, the audience may not be able to pick out like the drawing if it has all the fingers on it or not, but they'll see that the character grabbed something, and your eye usually recognizes, like when I was timing out my animatics, I noticed that within the first 12 frames, like that's when your eye starts to recognize what it is that's on screen. Like anything shorter than 12 frames at the beginning of the animatic, it's like it's really hard to register what that something is. So I would like hold it for like 14, and then they'd start moving, and then it would be like 8 and 8. So it's like another 16 frames to get the 2 poses out, and then I'm throwing out jargon at you guys. It's just like.
So that would that be on 1s or on 2s?
Oh, well, I mean, I thought we were talking about boards.
But I mean, because you have to time it in your board, they add the in-betweens, but are you thinking like on glitch text? Are you guys on ones or two? In other words, 2 frames, same shot for 2 frames. So instead of 24 frames a second,
It's
it's 12 frames or 30. I don't know, because it's video, so it's also different.
All of the panels, like all the panels are basically they're timed differently depending on what the action is. Like if a character's running into a scene, like that first panel might be, again, based on the pace at which they're running into scene, and it could be anywhere between 4 to 6 frames. If they're running across a pan, it's kind of like we would gauge it, like what would the eye be able to register. If it's 8 frames for the run, most animation in Japan is done on 4s. So if you have a run that's on 4s, if you have the proper key poses, it'll feel okay. Visually, if it's something that, like, so every panel would be broken up. So if you have 2 poses for a run, like you can have it on 8s, be like a slower run. If you have it on 4s, it's going to be a pretty fast run. And then you cycle those panels, and then you get, your run cycle. If they were to stop, like for example, if they were to hit a slide and they were to slide through the scene, like depending on, again, how fast you wanted that slide, you could time it anywhere between like 4 to 6 frames per panel to get them to slide and then stop. And then you might want to have that hold hit for, maybe 16 frames, and then they start moving again, just so you can read like fast, slow, stop, and then they take off again, just so the audience's eye can hold on that long enough. And even that's pretty fast, because like you might have them do something in that pause to like build out that time just before they start moving again.
Hey Phil, real quick, this thing about close-ups and holding on objects is piqued the interest of some of the viewers tonight. So Mark asked to continue this conversation. So going back to the grabbing the vial for the cauldron, wouldn't a close-up of the item being grabbed help? Plus that, I remember Lawrence Kasdan related how an action scene needed clarification on a plot point by adding a close-up of the item in question in post, if that makes sense.
Oh, it does. Yeah, of course. Definitely. If it's something
when he gets the object in the beginning, that idol.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Like before they take the idol from the pedestal, like, do you notice how like they put a lot of emphasis with the close-up of like swapping the idol, right?
Yeah.
And then once they get to the point where Indy is at the pit and his assistant, whose name I forget,
Alfred Molina.
Yeah, Alfred Molina plays the assistant, and he's like, give me the whip, and he's like, give me the idol, and I'll give you the whip, and then like the idol at that point is not really a close-up thing, and it's more of a football. So he just like tosses him. They don't put special emphasis at that point of the story with a close-up on the idol. It becomes the football. He catches it and then drops the whip, and the staging on the whip is like very clear. It's like up from the body, and he drops the whip, falls to the ground. And then, they did put emphasis on the close-up for Indy's hat. He makes the leap over the pit, and then he's trying to get past the wall that's coming down, and his hat comes off. So he has to reach back and get the hat. He pulls the hat in just before the wall comes down. So yeah, I totally am on board with like having close-ups in to clarify specific actions. So like if you had a very short scene and you had a character run in to grab something, there might be an instinct, depending on the way the sequence is structured, to cut into the close-up and he grabs, like say for example, if you had a story point and you're like, he grabbed the wrong potion. In a wider shot, he's running towards the 3 potions. There's red, green, and purple, right? And then you cut into a close-up as he's just, he's reaching for it in the wide. You cut into a close-up to hook up the action, and he reaches in and he grabs, the green one, which is the wrong one, because we all know that one is like the radioactive thing. And then you cut back to a medium shot, and he runs away with it past camera, bringing the potion past the camera. that's a nice use of the close up there to emphasize to the audience, hey, the character grabbed the wrong thing, or he grabbed the right thing, depending on how it's going.
Mm-hmm.
I think, so I'm all for those, like utilizing whatever filmmaking techniques that are done in film to utilize them in animation. And when you look at Glitch Techs as a show, a lot of the animation artists who are on the show, they're huge fans of anime. The French animation studio that animated it overseas, they were huge anime fans, as well as the board artists who were looking at anime to inform their decisions on how they were going to handle specific moments for best emotional impact. And you'll see like the way and when they used close-ups, or the way that they used specific anime influences to help like really boost a sequence. So what else you got?
That's it right now.
Okay. When you were looking at because I just watched was it Brand New Animal on Netflix, and there's certain anime isms that they use for certain for like close-ups, and I felt like when I was looking at Glitch Techs, like especially on the girl, the big face filling the frame, kind of, which is a little bit closer than sort of standard. I think it's more comedic, maybe, because it's like the kind of like pop up, big in your face kind of a thing. That seems to be a very anime-ism. Yeah,
there's a lot of language that's used in the anime that is different from American animation. Like when you look at when I watched Ninja Scroll back when I was in SVA, right?
I was looking at that when I was doing Samurai Jack.
Yeah, I watched Ninja Scroll and I was just like, what the? Like, this was definitely not like any of the action shows that I had watched. And then watching Dragon Ball was completely different as a genre. The sense of humor, the way that they stage the characters for comedy is different than a lot of the American cartoons. So when you look at anime comedies, you get a different language they use, and that could be used in American animation for comic effect. And that's what we did. We did have the artists, not that I told artists to look at this stuff, but they were finding resources on their own to like find ways to punch up the humor. There's a scene in Castle Crawl, which is the 6th episode, that Ben Choi did a fantastic job on the sequence where the Miko and Five are facing the unbeatable foe in the weapons room, and they're given this task, which is like all who try shall fail, right? So then Five is trying to beat this guardian, and he can't beat the boss, and then Miko pulls him through this. I'm giving away too many. Anyway, I'm giving away secrets of the show. Anyway, so they get past the boss, shall we say, and then the tropes that were utilized to deliver the comedy, to punctuate it, like Ben did a fantastic job in utilizing the anime tropes specifically to deliver the humor, and it had this effect of this gut punch of laughter through the whole crowd when they first saw it. When we saw the thumbnails, it was just freaking hilarious, and everyone was like, yeah, that's it, like, let's go. And it never changed from that point. Like we didn't like fine tune it or tweak it or anything. It was like, it just was the right combination of utilizing the trope at the right time for an extreme close up that helped deliver the comedy, and no one touched it. And that was the beautiful thing about working on the show, is like, if something was working, it was like, it works, like, don't touch it. Like the first rule of comedy that I remember reading, Mel Brooks' famous saying is like, if you laugh at the joke the first time, even if you've seen it like 100 times, remember that first laugh, and like, don't change it, because if it was funny the first time, it's probably going to be funny when it actually premieres and goes out to the audience. And sometimes when you're working on a project for a really long time, someone will put something in to a show and it's going to be funny, And then over time, when people see it over and over and over the course of a year, they'd be like, yeah, it's not so funny anymore. Let's pump it up. Like, and then the sequence will get reworked and it'll get changed. And then maybe 6 months will go, or maybe 2 months will go. And there's been so many reiterations of it and it's still quite not working. It's not quite as funny. And people start to question, why is this sequence in this movie anymore? And they forgot that when it was first boarded, it was really funny. And it was a funny take that would, accentuate or the humor of the project and elevate the property. But, people like look at something over and over and they want to rework it and rework it and rework it. And then it kind of kills the spontaneity and the fun. And that's on the one hand, depending on the show you work on. If it's a board driven show, I could see how that could be a real boon to artists who work on Steven Universe or other shows of that like, because they board it. If it's funny and the crew laughs and they get a good reaction, that spontaneity carries through the process, goes out to the audience. The audience says, wow, this is fresh and new. It's not familiar. And then they laugh. They want to come back and watch more.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess that's the other real difference between comics and working on comics and films. That films is a much longer, even cartoons, even if you only got 4 weeks, it's much longer process to get to the end where people are actually, through editing, animating, editing, post everything. And nothing will probably be funny to you after you've seen it 100 times. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like I even experienced that. It's funny in a way. I was looking last night. Somebody had tagged me on Instagram. It posted a bunch of old Darkhawk stuff, and I was going. And it's been like 30 years, so it's been long enough removed now that I can go back and in a way look at it, even though it's me, but don't look at it as me.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Which is very hard now when I do something and I put it out. All I see are the mistakes. All I see is the thing. Like, oh man, I fixed that. I even felt that way when I would watch my shows that I boarded. I was like, oh, I should have done this. I should have done. And then when enough time goes by, you can almost look at it as like a stranger.
Yeah. 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 It's funny. Like you mentioned that, like you see, if you see the same show, let's say you work on a show and you've worked on it from, I was directing on a show and I worked with an artist from thumbnail all the way to final ship. And sometimes you work on something so long and you get to the point where you're not really sure if it's funny anymore. Like you've heard the same jokes over and over in multiple edit sessions. And you're like, I would have to mentally remind myself when I first saw this, I laughed out loud. And then even though I've seen it for like the 6th time and I'd be like, oh God, this joke or this bit, and I'd have to remind myself like, no, you laughed the first time you saw this. So remember that and just let it go. Don't try and fix it. Don't try and like add a little bit more glitter on it. Just let it go. Just, and the same thing would come with comics. Like if I look back at some of my comic work that I've done, I'd be like, oh man, like I could have done this. And I'm like, all right, you know what? That's where I was at that time. I would do it differently now. But that's done. I can't fix that. So I gotta like step back, let it go, and be like, all right, what else can I do next? What's the next thing that I could do that I could take that and remember? Oh yeah, don't do that thing.
Right, you learn from it, right?
Yeah, like don't do that again. Make sure. And then when I get to that part and I'm drawing that whatever it is that I didn't like from the last thing, be like, okay, remember that thing you said don't do? Okay, yeah, and then you don't do it.
I have some more questions.
Right.
They flooded in. We always have questions here at Pencil to Pencil.
Awesome. It's good. You guys are questioning everything.
We're curious cats. Debbie asked a great question. Before I put it on the screen, I want to maybe give some context to this. And a lot of my teaching, if I've taught youth or high school kids who are really into comics, you start to see, and this is probably even like more prevalent now, this very interesting appearance of manga and anime sensibilities in their American comic making, especially when it's concerning emotional plays or emotional tics,
Yes.
or showing reactions to things. Like if somebody's mad, like everything turns to flames in the back, and they have like the broken glass teeth, and and everything. It's like
that little vein,
or like
the
the
cross,
the tear, all of that.
The sweat drop.
Right, the sweat drop. And I remember
the radiating lines over their eyes where they should be, the embarrassing, like in the face. Yeah. Okay.
And kind of putting that up against you doing kind of like kind of American storytelling, where the emotional stuff is a lot more nuanced.
Mm-hmm.
Debbie's question is, how do you manage conveying emotion without being too heavy-handed?
Okay. I was just recalling a time when I was at Disney. I was mentoring a high school student who wanted to get into comics, and she loved manga. And so we were going over her approach to the comic and telling the story of these high school kids and, the high school drama romance comic that she wanted to make. And I was really trying to get her to see how to draw the characters, not using the anime tropes or the manga tropes. So she was drawing the manga heads and the manga faces, and then the emotions that she would draw. Those emotions from manga communicate really well because that's the language they use, and it clearly reads to that audience like, oh, that's the angry face. Oh, that's the confused face. That's the embarrassed face. That's the I want to die, I'm so ashamed face. Like, she was putting those in the comic, and I was like, this is great, but this is a Xerox of a Xerox of a Xerox. Like, I want to know, like, really, how do you draw? How will you draw the actual emotion of the characters?
Not a symbol of the emotion.
Not a symbol. How do these characters respond? Because right now you're drawing a symbol of anger or a symbol of love or a symbol of this, but you're not diving into who these characters are and why would they react that way, and through that exploration, if you dive into like, how do they feel, or how would you feel? I mean, that's what we would do in acting class. We would say, like, in method acting, it's like, how would you feel if you felt ashamed, or how would you feel if you felt in love or overjoyed? Like, how would your body respond, and how do you feel physically when you are feeling that emotion? And then how can you get that on the page? Because the symbol is like, it's just an emotionless symbol. It's clear and it works for anime and manga, but it doesn't exactly tell the audience how you feel about emotion or how the character feels about the emotion. So for a more genuine, authentic experience when they're reading the book, if you dive into drawing that emotion on the character, it's going to be hard. Okay, like, let me just couch this in this sense. Drawing the symbol works because it's fast and it clearly reads, and it's a shortcut. It's kind of like
Taco Bell.
it's like, yeah, it's not authentic Mexican food. It kind of tastes like it, but it's fast and it's quick and it's convenient, and it's like, boom, you get your Mexican food fix. But to really go through the labor of making a burrito or an empanada or an enchilada, like, when you have real authentic Mexican food, your mouth just goes bam, like it just, you have this sensation of all these flavors being stimulating your brain, and you have to go through the labor to make that happen. So when you sit down to draw your character emoting something, whether it's sadness or happiness, it's going to be difficult to convey that because you're fighting your need to be able to communicate clearly with your skill set
Right.
It's hard. You're trying to get all this stuff and keep it on model and make your character look consistent. So you're juggling all this stuff, and it's always really tempting to go to that symbol and be like, oh, I'll just grab this symbol and I'll just put it on and I'll shortcut that. But the guys that we were talking about last week, like Ramita and Buscema and the comic masters that we were shooting to advance to their level, like they'll get down to work and they'll draw the emotion of the characters. And you see that in Glenn Keane's work, or Andreas Deja or Alex Cooper-Schmidt. They will dig into the emotions, and it's freaking hard, you know, and going through that labor exercises the muscles of your artistic skill, so that when you have to do it again and again and again, you keep getting better, and you can get better at conveying that emotion without being too heavy-handed.
So the interesting thing about this, and I think maybe all three of us have been at this place at some point with
Uh-huh.
students or young people who, you know, they've basically grown up with this new language. And when we say it's, not to say it's wrong, but when we challenge it, we could easily come off as being out of touch.
Right.
Right. So I like how you said, Phil, that it's not necessarily wrong. It's just a different way of interpreting.
Well, also too, the symbol only works if you recognize it as a symbol. Like a lot of people, you would show somebody like, super embarrassed, and they would have a big teardrop next to their head. They would go like, what the hell? Why?
Right.
Is that an ice cream cone? What is what is that?
If you're showing pages like that contain a lot of manga symbols to an editor who publishes American comics, and they're not publishing a manga title, then yeah, they'll look at it and be like, okay, my readership won't understand these symbols, so this isn't going to fly for a Spider-Man book. Like, there's a Japanese artist right now who's working in American comics who I think his work is stunning, and his name is escaping me right now. But he did a series that I picked up from the library. Oh man, it was like crap. It's like Space Cadet show or something like that. First Cadet. Okay. Anyway,
he's a Japanese artist.
Japanese artist, yes. And his name is escaping me right now. But I picked it up specifically because he was drawing kids fighting in mecha, and there were no anime manga tropes in it. It was an American published comic, graphic novel, and it was basically like the emotions were expressed on each of the characters.
Somebody just put it in. Is that the guy?
Oh, hold on.
I can't see it.
Hold on a second. Takazawa. Yeah, Stuntkin would know. He's a resident official.
Well, you don't see that when you look at Akira. You do not see those tropes.
No, and you look at Otomo's work. Like Otomo is a Japanese icon who presents his characters having real emotions. They don't devolve to the symbols, but again, he's got a different aesthetic. Like the other productions in Japan, the anime productions tend to use the symbols for comic effect. So they use them specifically to deliver impact and comic effect. They don't use them all the time. And that's something that we had to watch out for on Glitch Text. We had to use it specifically. We had to use those symbols specifically for comic effect. Like, we didn't want to have the characters doing it all the time, because it wasn't an anime. Like, that's not the best use of like those special designs, because each time we had one of those designs for a character to strike an anime face, that had to be a special pose created by the character designers. So we couldn't have them doing that all over the place. We wanted to save those for like very specific comical effects. There's in the episode Buds, which is currently on the second season of Netflix. When you watch that episode, there's one sequence where everyone is kind of coming around to this new Mitch being everybody's bud, and Miko's still not on board. And our board artist, Sheldon, he put in this one specific pose that every time we watched it, for that one scene, when 5 hits that one pose, which is a manga, big kawaii-eyed pose, it delivered the laughs like every single time. And it was used specifically for that moment. And it was used so well that it just like it kept delivering. But you never see him do that again at any part of the episode. So it's like a very specific time that we use it, and it's it makes it special. Like for example, like I was thinking about, there's a particular live action director who's been very, very successful, who started in commercial films and has worked on big blockbuster films, and you probably know him. He's got, I'm not going to say who it is, but he's done a lot of films with like giant robots that change into things. And if you've ever watched his films, if you turn the sound off, even on a film like The Rock, you know who I'm talking about by now, right?
Yeah.
You turn off The Rock's sound, right? And you just watch the film by itself. The camera never stops moving. Every single shot, the camera's moving.
It's always like creeping a little bit.
Yeah, it's always drifting. It's always doing this. It's always doing it. It's all, and that's his language. Like every shot is alive. That's his film language. But what I was noticing as I was watching the film is like, when does the camera stop? Because if the camera's always moving, and that's just the aesthetic, like the camera always has to be moving. Like, well, when do you draw emphasis? You know what I mean? Like you're creating, like, if you want to create that contrast, if you have a film or a show that's all locked off shots, and then you do a crazy, like, for example, Itano Circus at the very end of the show, that Itano Circus, for those of you who know, it's basically when they do those missile shots in anime where it's like everything's crazy and the characters are flying around in the background, spinning and all that. If you were to save that to the very end of the show and everything up to that point was all locked off shots and very static cameras, and you get to that one shot at the very end, it's going to be like, boom. It's going to really stand out.
Yeah.
So those are the kind of things that you can control as an artist when you sit down. And this is what I was talking to one of the artists recently that I was working with. I said, when you look at your script page, if you can sit down and figure out what are the shots you want to use, how do you want to deliver this information to the audience, and pick your shots specifically so that you know, like, oh, I want to do a pan here, but okay, if I do a pan here, like, you're strategizing your assets, so to speak, like your artistic assets, like how much of a pan do you want to do here, or how many moving shots do you want to do in this particular sequence so I can economize in my next sequence. So if I have a dialogue scene after this action scene, my dialogue scene leading up to this action scene, I'm going to do mostly locked off shots. I'm going to keep this very static, very controlled.
The Japanese are the masters of that. You watch any of those. I would tell my students to go watch their favorite, like, Pokemon, Naruto, any of the Dragon Ball, turn the sound off.
Yeah.
And then pay attention to, like, well, there's nothing happening here. And then there's the action sequence. And then there's like nothing happening. Slow pan, something going north-south, people are walking north-south from the torso up. You don't see any legs. You don't hardly see any arms.
And that's what we would do. Like, as a director, I would do that on every show, like talk to the artist to be like, okay, how can we economize? Like, how do we want, as an overall, how do we want to control the high points so we don't exceed our shot count and minimize the amount of like animation, so we could save our animation resources and keep the animators fresh, so that when they get to the end of the show where there's the giant climax, they can really put the money in and the time in there, and everything else up to that is decent, but it's not going to kill them, so that by the time they get to the end of the show, they're just like, oh, I'm exhausted. I can't draw no more. I've got nothing left.
So they actually give you guys have a shot count, because that's nothing that I ever dealt with on any of the shows that I worked on.
Yeah, you have a scene count. You have to make sure you come in under, so that you're trying to preserve your animation resources so that you don't exceed it. If you have a show, like let's say you had an 11-minute show that had 500 shots, whoa, like you're just like like even if it was like 300, that's like way more, way. It's like too much. So like for an 11-minute show, if you have like 180 shots, you're pushing it, but you're probably within a good range that your animators can deliver, unless every one of those is insane shots. But anyway, and then when you have like your 22-minute, we were shooting for like it's like 380, I think it was. It's been a little while, but it's like we had a limit that we were trying not to go over, and that way, what was it, 280? I think it was 280. I don't know. Everything's blurring together.
So that was established in the beginning as one of the production values that you couldn't really go over. Just like you have so many retakes you can get, which for people means that if you get a scene back and it's kind of funky, you say, no, you guys need to redo it. But each show only has so many retakes.
Yeah,
so
you've got to retake.
You have to be creative. So I remember Dan sent me a Superman show that I had worked on, and there was a scene where he was flying, and as he was flying, his body started like getting sort of distorted because they couldn't really do that kind of Kirby kind of distortion. Mm-hmm. So they had to figure out like, right here's where we've got to cut, so you don't see the foot or the body get too weird looking
before you start questioning it. Right.
Yeah, because they only had, I seem to remember the number of like around 40 or something, 40 scenes in total that you could redo.
So just to jump back a little bit, Mech Cadet U was the proper title.
Oh, okay.
Mech Cadet U, and that was drawn by Takashi Miyazawa, and Greg Pak was the writer.
Oh yeah, Greg's great. All right, Phil. I think it's time. It's time. It's time for the lightning round.
Okay.
Question Palooza.
All right, let's do it.
All right, cool. So
how many do we got, and how much time do I have? Start the counter.
I don't have all of that, but I got a bunch of questions, and we're just going to blow through them.
Okay.
So Edward, who's been hanging out all night, wants to know, what are your top 3 cartoons or animations you liked when you were a kid? Go.
Okay. Gatchaman, aka G-Force, Space Battleship Yamato, and Dungeons and Dragons.
Nice.
That was my Saturday lineup, or my afternoon lineup. Robotech, was up there too, so that's a 4.
Right.
Feature animated films, there were many. Anyway.
Very cool. I love that. Okay, all right, cool. Stuntkin says he's been waiting.
Okay.
Phil, anime and manga has influenced storytelling, but I don't see that much influence from, say, Hong Kong action movies, where the camera worker is also done so well to express storytelling as well. So why has the audience not picked up on those nuances from HK action cinema like manga and anime? It's an interesting question.
You mean, why hasn't American animation picked up on that?
Yeah.
Probably because it's really freaking hard.
You mean the John Woo with 1,000 doves?
Yeah, with the
dove. Right. If you look at the team that put together Voltron, they put together that's the artistic staff between Avatar, The Last Airbender, Korra, Legend of Korra, and Voltron. Like they're shooting for they're shooting that direction. So. Not every show can do that. Not every artist is diving into animation to do that. Like they may not all want to make that product, and that particular product, that genre, outside of DC and the action shows that they produce there's not a lot of content, if you've noticed across the board, of studios producing action content in that vein. Like there are more comedy shows that lean towards like Trolls and Adventure Time and Steven Universe,
or like action comedy. Like the action is part of the comedy.
Yeah. Like Glitch Techs and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, those are kind of like anomalies, considering like the vast majority of like afternoon animation that's made for the networks here in the US is a little bit more skewed towards like Teen Titans Go, Steven Universe, SpongeBob, and shows like that. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, those shows are really funny and they're really fun to look at and fun to watch. And there's less demand in terms of like what it takes to make those shows. So like when you look at a DC show, like a Batman straight to video, those can borrow nuances from Hong Kong action cinema, but they demand a higher caliber of time investment from the artists and from the production team to make that come across. Like another great show that's out there right now is Young Justice, which did 2 seasons on Cartoon Network, and then they did the 3rd online, and that has great storytelling, great visuals, and really great writing. And again, it's a niche that it caters to a particular crowd. The majority of animation currently being made in the U.S. is geared towards like 6 to 12 girls and boys. So a lot of studios might want to invest time and energy into shows that will deliver at a general audience level to get everybody, versus like, say if they made like Harley Quinn that was recently put out from Warner, that's skewed a lot older, and it's skewed towards a very niche crowd. It's the 18 to 34 demographic, which is not your meat and potatoes of like animation people tuning into the networks. So they're going to skew to where they can get the most bang for their buck. And I think it's fine. It's just a business model. So,
all right. Here's another one from Mark C. Robinson, and we're going to start wrapping soon.
Yeah.
What do you consider to be troubling trends currently in animation? Great question.
Troubling trends. That's an interesting broad topic that would probably take
another episode
to talk about. Yeah. And I think if there's people on the outside who are picking things up, like we could always confirm or deny whether those things are actually happening. But maybe we could go on to another question then.
All right. Well, to be continued that. We'll take a longer conversation. And Phil, we'll have to have you back in the future. I'm going to give you back your evenings.
Right.
Oh man, I just lost it. Hold on a second. Oscar asks, in your perspective, this is a great last question. In your perspective, where's the animation industry heading to?
That's a good question.
And maybe we can like put some COVID.
That's the 4th podcast.
Put some COVID in this, right? Because we talked a little bit, like even with Kat, about how COVID and how the industry has kind of flexed to continue to keep people working.
It flexed a lot last week when Disney basically said the future is streaming, and everybody else said, "Oh shit, the other yellow shoe dropped." Yeah.
So has that trickled down to you guys yet, or what are you thinking about as of where is this trending, or is this just
It's funny, back in 2016, I saw that on the wall that streaming was the next platform. That's where we were going to head to. And then when I was working on Glitch Techs, I was an advocate and talking to a few people about trying to get the show, again, not within my power to do so, nor the show creators at that time, although they can express their interest in that, to get the show to stream instead of broadcast. That way it reached a global network versus just the US market. Streaming is where we're headed. The industry is going to be creating more and more content for streaming platforms. Eventually, I think, again, this is just my opinion, but based on the fact that there's more people attached to their phones and their computers when they're locked in their houses, trying to not get sick, or they need just an escape. They're escaping to platforms where they can stream their favorite entertainment to take their minds off of like what the general broadcasts are on the major cable networks. So eventually, I think, the animation industry is going to be heading into a great creative space, because there's a lot of shows right now that are being created for broader content, like broader content for a wider audience, to appeal to the streaming market. So you have adult shows that are being that are outside of the Fox lineup, that are being created for fans of more adult humor in animation. There's going to be a lot of experimental animation as more and more platforms and more cable networks realize that they have a future in streaming. They're going to start to say, like, well, how can we broaden our library of animated content? And that will hopefully foster more green lights on animated projects and broaden up the world of animation. So you'll have more serious drama that's being animated, or action, rom-coms, and just things outside of your normal animated content, as more and more people are going to be demanding more from their streaming providers.
Yeah. One of the things that I lived through and when I got into the business was when Hayam Saban got out of producing stuff and Kids WB went away, and the rise of Cartoon Network and Nickelodeon. And I remember one of the concerns was that it took more, you had to sell more McDonald's ads to be on Fox than you had to have to be on Cartoon Network. The numbers didn't have to be the same, so you could have a show that would be deemed unsuccessful on a major network because they had to have to generate more ad money, but you could put it on cable and you wouldn't have to generate the same amount of ad money. And I'm imagining that scenario is now going to be playing out with streaming, because you're going to be able to have streams that don't require, you can make a show that's not going to have, a giant budget of, $400,000, $500,000 an episode. But, like the Venture Brothers had a much smaller budget than Batman, but they still were able to make an entertaining show. So I think that's probably the way things are going to be going, because you're going to have all these platforms that need content.
Oh yeah. Yeah. There's going to be a lot of cable networks that are going to start to transition over, to streaming, and they're going to realize, like, we need more content. And we saw that same thing happen, if for those that can remember, when cable networks first began, like, there was only HBO, and then after that came Showtime and Cinemax, and then MTV, and everything started to expand. And then the network, there were only 3 networks when I was a kid. It was like, ABC, NBC, and CBS. That was it. And then you had PBS, and those were like 4.
And a couple of UHF.
UHF. Yeah. And then when cable came along, it was suddenly people were demanding, I want more. So new networks started up. Viacom had, burgeoning. Nickelodeon. If you can remember back in the day, there was a show.
Nick at Night.
Yeah, they just were like putting anything they could to get, content out there for people to subscribe to their cable network and pay their monthly fees. And the same thing is going to happen with, like, streaming. It's gonna be that same transition where everyone starts to move away from, cable and move into streaming. And it should be a really interesting time, because it'll just open up the doors for, new and unique content to address a desire for fans to watch something that isn't what we've had before.
Also, I think it's opening it up globally, because if people are not going to necessarily all have to be in the same studio to produce stuff, then you can produce things through partnerships and teams with a global network, which people have done before, but not as much as I think people will be doing, or actually are doing right now.
Yeah, now that we have the technology, like previously, like, we were not able to do this at all. Like, even back when I was working on feature, we had limited internet. We had just the burgeoning, like, the beginning of the internet. And then now we have teleconferencing, which we're doing. And just think, like, if there's a artist a storyboard artist in Nigeria that you really want to work with, well, now you can contact that person and have them work on your show, and you could communicate very easily. Don't have to rely on FedEx or like, you know, faxes.
DHL.
Yeah, we could just communicate the idea of like what the sequences are, share animatics or information across networks, and then you have you know, unlimited access to the resources that are out there in the world, which hopefully will make all of the entertainment quality like just kind of rise up, because you have access to the talent now from across the countries and across the world.
I love it. Well, Phil, thank you so much for coming back a second time. I think this was a great cherry on top of the sundae. So I appreciate you and your wealth of knowledge. Some of our viewers are saying thank you, Phil, for being such an amazing guest.
Thanks. Thank you.
So this is the power of Pencil to Pencil, making everybody feel good. So cool. And Oscar is a failure. So I want to thank you again. I want to start wrapping up. Mike, do you have any last words for Phil before we head out?
No, just a big thank you. I'm glad you were able to come back. I mean, I think it's really important to give the younger artists coming up all this information, because a lot of this stuff we didn't really have or didn't know when we were starting out. And you sort of, I think that's the benefit of each generation being able to pass things on to the next generation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's tremendous. I mean, that's the thing that I've had a chance to do for a number of years in as a director, to be able to pass things that I've learned over the years of being in animation and sequential art and games to the artists that I've been working with, and help to expand like their understanding of a particular aspect of production, or help them to become or I should say, just help them on their journey as an artist, you know, in any way I can.
Do you have any, would you recommend any resources that you would think that would be good for young board artists or people interested in that? I mean, I know you talked about a few books, but would you, can you think offhand of any sources that might be good that they could get online?
Yeah. I would really highly advise, like, I don't have the book. Let me see if I have it. Sorry. I would definitely highly recommend, there's a couple books that I would check out. One is Framed Ink by Marcus Mateu, and he has a follow-up book to that called Perspective. I would check that out. Those are great primers on camera for comics and for film, as well as perspective. It's super important for if you want to get into boards to have or comics for that matter, to have a really good foundation in the fundamentals of perspective and drawing the figure in that perspective. It's one thing, as you probably already know, like you probably instructed your students, like it's one thing to draw pinups, which are great, and it's like great to post on Instagram, but it's another thing to post a page that has characters that are fully emoting, worked out in an environment, and that's pretty much what you have to do every day as a board artist. You have it in yourself to basically become the best artist you can and understand what you're drawing as best you can, so that you can communicate as clearly as you can. So those two books off the top of my head. Any book on perspective that you can get a chance to work from would be beneficial, so you get a real good understanding of it. Richard Williams has a great book called The Animator Survival Kit. Eric Goldberg also put out a book called Animation Crash Course. Those are both great books to take a look at, if you would like to understand how to animate, which will then inform your storyboards, which will then inform your comic pages. If you look at those books, practice what's in those books. Don't just look at the books. I mean, you got to literally, I would redraw what's in the books so that I can make what was in the book work in my program or on a piece of paper, so that I then could take that knowledge from the book, practically apply it, and put it up here, so that when I do it again without the book, I know, like, yeah, it's formulas, but you can take those formulas and build on them. Right. As long as they don't become your crutch, you build on them, and then it informs everything you do after that. So like when you get to be, directing or editing a show, you're like, oh, okay, I know the average of this is X frames. Let me see if it works. Oh, didn't work. Oh, let me just add a little bit more, a little less. Now it'll work. Okay. But at least I had a starting point. So that's good. We were talking about filmmaking, cinematography. So shot by shot is definitely a good one for mechanics of learning film language. The 5 C's of Cinematography is a little bit of an older book, but definitely still worth the read. And in terms of film editing, I gotta remember that name of that editor, because he was definitely, I learned more from his books than Walter Tope's books. But yeah, anything that you could read to, aside from what you find on the internet, to help you digest the knowledge and get it in you so that you can apply it, is good. So
awesome. Great. Thanks, Phil. And we'll end with this. JRD says, thank you for your service. Now go sit down. All right, you guys, we're going to end on that. Phil, if you want to do Kirby hands with us on our way out, let me say my goodbyes. So thank you guys for another great Pencil to Pencil. We'll be back here on Saturday. We might have a little wiggly schedule because the Ringo Awards are happening at the very same time as our episode, and I have to do some work for that. So we'll figure it out, and you'll hear all about it.
Maybe you have like a stand-up. There'll be like a...
So for our guest Phil, for my best bud Mike, I'm Jamar Nicholas. You know what to do next, you guys. Wash those curvy hands. We'll see you on Saturday. Take care, brother and sisters.